If you think someone could possibly best the likes of Max Verstappen as a teammate, the old boss of his might have to burst your bubble. The recently retired Franz Tost, in charge of Toro Rosso and AlphaTauri since the former's rebranding from Minardi, has basically said that the entire grid and future grid are never going to get anywhere near besting or being fully compatible as a teammate to Max. And this is all in the wake of Helmet Marko calling off the search for the next Max Verstappen for the junior Red Bull category because, simply put, he does not exist. Whilst also lauding the brand new recruit of the junior program, Oliver Goethe. Wow. Imagine hearing all of that. You get recruited to the Red Bull Junior program, and then your boss goes, you know Max Verstappen. Wow, backhanded compliment. No, just no compliment. But going back to Franz Tost, in his comments from F1 Insider, he was giving us a brief understanding as to the situation regarding who could be Max Verstappen's next teammate and the problems that they may face. Thusly, if Max continues to have a good car, he will win many more races and titles. He's still not at the limit, and he's only going to get better. No driver who is or will be his teammate will ever get beyond the role of a number 2 driver. So yes, quite to the point from Mr. Tost there. This being the guy who famously continues to work at AlphaTauri even though it's Christmas on his own. And in his retirement musings, he basically said he wasn't happy or proud with his tenure, he never got 5th place, so to him that's a failure, and he calls himself stupid. But before you dismiss these comments as yet another old man like Helmet Marko spouting his mouth and not knowing what he's talking about, you've really got to look at the background of Franz Tost in regard to the Red Bull Junior camp and where things go, as well as giving us many clues as to who could be the next teammate to Max Verstappen. After all, he was there when Max Verstappen first turned a wheel in his car. In fact, when all the Red Bull Juniors first turned a wheel in the car, all the way up to Liam Lawson in 2023. He has seen them come and go in a way and a context that is far more relevant to whatever Helmet Marko has to say. Sure, Marko recruits them, but Franz Tost works with them on the daily. He sees them develop, he breaks them in, he, as Daniel Ricciardo said, gives them many reality checks and makes them mature very, very fast. And it's not like Franz Tost had been doing nothing before he joined Toro Rosso. No. He's been working around the Schumacher brothers in some capacity. He was the trackside engineer of BMW for Ralf Schumacher, and then before that, he worked with Ralf Schumacher in his junior Formula days, with also Willy Weber, the Schumacher's manager for the longest time. I think Franz Tost knows a thing or two with raising rookies, as well as working with a Schumacher, who would then go on to win many races, and have a good pedigree in terms of knowing what to do with a sense of speed. Yes, I know it's Ralph, not Michael, but it's still something. Okay, so he's stating the obvious. Nobody can beat Max, nobody can be a good teammate other than being subservient. What's the point of this video then? I want to talk about the likes of Yuki Tsunoda and Daniel Ricciardo, what they must do to be a good teammate for Max Verstappen in this era of his career, as well as making a mark of their own that makes sure they don't fade away into the background, and they don't make any unrealistic goals and expectations. Continuing on from his interview opener and being a doomsayer to most F1 drivers, Tost cited Verstappen's key ingredient, that the Schumacher brothers also had, was that he has a strong relationship with driving and the sensation of speed. It wouldn't faze him at all. How Max jumped in the 2014 Toro Rosso at Suzuka, and wasn't that bad considering his age, and that the only other car he had raced before the STR9 was a Formula 3 car. That's a very big difference. What made Max Verstappen really good is that you hit the ground running, getting to grips with a Formula 1 car doesn't bother you at all, and that you can quickly adapt and learn things on the fly instead of taking an extremely long time to get to grips with things and yet still not really produce that many results. Which kind of goes against Tost's mantra of a Formula 1 driver requiring 3 seasons in which to get fully up to speed by. But I can assure you, both Tsunoda and Ricciardo have made good cases in getting up to speed relatively quickly, which I will talk about later. But any driver that can hope to challenge Max needs to be a person that is not bothered by a Formula 1 car and could just get on with the job. For 2025, the bookies are clearly looking at Yuki Tsunoda and Daniel Ricciardo as the ones that will stand the best chance of getting into the side saddle of Max Verstappen's organisation. Yes, I am aware that Sergio Perez is still at Red Bull, and he could impress some people in 2024, making more of an impression, maybe getting a couple of wins, and then maybe securing P2 a little earlier and more convincingly than he did in 2023. But it seems quite likely that he's probably not going to get another contract extension like he did a couple of years ago. But I think he can hold his head up high and see out his contract fully and not be ousted mid-season, like some people do tend to speculate. I don't think he will. But from what I have seen and what I think that this seat, the 2025 one, is Daniel Ricciardo's seat to lose. Yuki Tsunoda has done enough to hang in there at AlphaTauri for a 4th season after his decent efforts of carrying the team in 2023, and whilst the other seat was having a game of musical chairs. And Yuki Tsunoda has been able to follow the remit of Franz Tost perfectly. He has had 3 seasons to get up to speed, and I think the Yuki Tsunoda that we saw at Abu Dhabi 2023 is a very interesting prospect and somebody who could really challenge Daniel Ricciardo. Especially considering a few months ago, everybody thought that Tsunoda would be completely swallowed up by Daniel, but that didn't happen. And also, it's nice to see Tost's dream carry itself out, considering that nowadays, most drivers and rookies are lucky to even get 1 season before speculation mounts up, and in some cases, like Nyck de Vries, they're lucky to even get 10 races, something of which Franz was very deeply aggrieved about, but he kinda had no choice because the higher-ups, they wanted Daniel. But when it came to Tsunoda, Tost had a soft spot for him, Helmet Marko citing Tsunoda as a problem child, and Tost kinda liked that about Yuki, that he had the fire to improve, and that he wasn't somebody who was subservient, yet he was also willing to take direction when it was apt and necessary. Let's be real here, Yuki Tsunoda mainly got these 3 seasons for the fact that, realistically, in the junior program, there weren't really that many compelling drivers that were ready to jump into Formula 1. We of course had the likes of Dennis Hauger, Jan de Ruvela, Liam Lawson of course, but Liam was still relatively young, and the 2023 Super Formula season was really necessary for his development. It's going to be very crucial in this 4th season that Yuki has to perform. He has no more excuses, whilst also fully committing to Red Bull and getting into the 2nd seat alongside Max, not looking over at Aston Martin as a plan B thanks to their future Honda connections. He believes his future is with Christian Horner and Red Bull and not with Aston Martin and Papa Stroll. He has stated that many times to make sure that they won't go, he's not exactly loyal, that's going to count against him, I'm afraid. Daniel, you good to drive? Yeah, don't worry fellas, I'm good. I'll do whatever you say. And when it comes to the ideals of Tost and hitting the ground running, Yuki did just that. Remember 2021? Yes, he did have his outburst, but he was really good for a rookie. In 2021, he got 32 points and scored on debut in Bahrain, as well as getting a cheeky 4th place in Abu Dhabi, doing his part in giving Alpine a little bit of a fright in the battle for 5th place in the Constructors. They were only 14 points away from getting Franz Host's dream of 5th place in the Constructors. Imagine if he had done that. I think Yuki would have been really much getting a Christmas card from Franz, naturally having been written and mailed from the AlphaTauri factory. But unfortunately, with AlphaTauri falling off hard in the ground effect era, especially in the first half of 2023, Yuki's efforts have been muddied somewhat, and it's only now we're starting to see the results come back. And that Abu Dhabi performance, where he briefly led the race, even though he didn't know it, was very nice to see. I think he quite likes that track, don't you agree? So you could argue that, nah, Yuki's not gonna get it, it took him too long to get used to the car. Max Verstappen was in the Red Bull seat by the time he got to somewhere into his 2nd season. That's not good enough. Surely that's not going to be good enough. Perhaps Liam Lawson deserves a seat more since he scored at the hardest street track on the calendar, knocked Max Verstappen out of Q3 in the process, and kept the car on the road at his first race of the Dutch Grand Prix at the last minute, mid-session, in changeable conditions. Yes, that could qualify very nicely for preferential treatment, but you do get the sense that Christian Horner, yeah, he likes taking the occasional risk, but I think this risk would be a little bit too much. I reckon Liam Lawson does have to do a full season initially at AlphaTauri or whatever they're going to be called. Maybe Max Verstappen's last teammate at Red Bull or in Formula 1 altogether. Now, speaking of muddy performances, Daniel Ricciardo's kind of had the same thing since the ground effect era came in. Tussling with a McLaren car that never agreed with his style of driving, and a Mercedes power unit and its power delivery not really favouring his taste either. 2022 was a really bad year for Daniel, and stamping any kind of authority of being in Formula 1, completely trounced by Lando Norris, giving the young Brit the sense that he was invincible. He had bested convincingly an 8-time Grand Prix winner. That would have been music to anybody's ears, that you could completely decimate Daniel Ricciardo, wipe the smile off of his face. But thankfully, thanks to a little bit of backpedaling from Helmet Marko realizing he'd done a bad deal with Nyck de Vries, he managed to get a chance to not only come back into Formula 1, but also come back into the Red Bull fold with his tail between his legs in a way, and Christian Horner more than happy to have him come back. And also, he's also really smug probably, Christian, because I got the one that got away back. Tost was very happy with Daniel's rookie season for them, as was the case with his then teammate Jean-Eric Vergne. In fact, it was so good that when Mark Webber retired, he got the call up to go to partner Sebastian Vettel, and then sent Sebastian Vettel into a bit of a tailspin in the brand new turbo hybrid era with a car that wasn't particularly good. The Renault engine was really not up to snuff, and it made Sebastian Vettel just suddenly go, you know what, I'm going to try and emulate my idol and get a title for Ferrari. Yeah, I'm going. And ironically, in a way, Daniel kind of did the same thing 4 years later. But what Daniel has in his favour in this case is that he's already been a teammate to Max Verstappen. He is a known quantity. And sure, there might be a little bit of a concern that he might emulate all of the antics that happened in 2018, of course, it all coming to a head in Baku, but I really don't see that happening. The Daniel Ricciardo of now to the Daniel Ricciardo of 7 years ago is a whole other beast. But yeah, back in that season, those two were on it, and I reckon that Daniel Ricciardo would have been a lot closer to Max Verstappen had reliability not gotten in the way, and that Renault engine completely failing. And I still find it really weird that the Renault engine was his main culprit in not being as good as Max in terms of points, and yet he goes to Renault, the works operation. How much money were they offering him? But for what Christian Horner's take is worth, he would rather avoid conflict like he had in 2018 with Daniel and Max, and Vettel and Webber prior to that, stating he would rather avoid two Alpha drivers being in the same team, and also why we will never see Fernando Alonso partnering Max Verstappen at Red Bull, or in Formula 1. But somewhere else though? Oh yeah, no doubt. I really don't see that happening, any sort of discord. Daniel Ricciardo is simply happy to be back, potentially driving for a Red Bull car, which is right at the top of the grid. He will easily be in the pound seat when it comes to winning some races, maybe trying to get to double figures. He will toe the line. He'll be just happy to be back in the top team once more, having thought that he would never get the chance, probably ruining the day that he decided to go to Renault, even though he was actually getting the groove back in 2020, and he again jumped the boat a little bit too soon. Sort of doing a Fernando Alonso in a way. He will be a lot more compliant and less likely to upset Max, and he would play along with the Red Bull rhetoric and aid Max to his next titles. As for Yuki though, I feel like his tenure alongside Max Verstappen would be a lot more tempestuous and unpredictable, and yet at the same time he will still be very loyal to the Red Bull cause because they gave him a chance. It's a really interesting bag, isn't it? He's going to be loyal and he will toe the line and listen to instructions, but he's also not going to be a pushover. And I think Max might like that. And Yuki's got a lot more to fight for because he also will be in the pound seat driving a RB21, which will probably just be as good as the RB20, which will also be just as good as the RB19. And he's also got the chance to be one of the most successful Japanese drivers in Formula 1 history, potentially scoring multiple podiums, or even being the first Japanese driver to win a Formula 1 race. That is absolutely crazy that we've not seen that. He will immediately be put on the pedestal right up there with the likes of Kamui Kobayashi and Takuma Sato, the recent Japanese success stories. And I don't think Max Verstappen would be that bothered about it, because Max does not want a pushover of a driver, because after all, he has talked about many drivers up and down the grid that he kind of likes racing against. He loves the idea of working with Fernando Alonso. He loves the idea of racing with these fantastic drivers, even though they're at different teams. He wants competition. He wants a challenge. He wants to have fun. I don't think he would want to have a teammate that is not going to challenge him and not make him fired up, because at the beginning of 2023, when Checo was on it and he was fired up, that got Max Verstappen fired up himself, and he got motivated, and then we saw that season. That's what you get when you stoke Max Verstappen, and I bet he had a lot of fun throughout that entire year, proving his point. He would want to be challenged, and I feel that Yuki Tsunoda will be the person to do it, because there are a lot of unknowns with Yuki Tsunoda, and he knows it. He's actually said that he doesn't really have a good idea about how he would stack up against Max Verstappen, but he would certainly love to give it a try and find out. He also reckons that he probably would give him a bit of a scare when it comes to dry qualifying trim, and that in a typical qualifying session, he might actually best him. I don't know right now, but I would definitely love to see that. That sort of intrigue is really getting my gears turning, and I'm like, oh yes, we've got a stoked Japanese driver, we've got a stoked Dutchman. They're not going to be going against the grain too much. I think this could be really juicy, and I feel like Yuki Tsunoda might be in the pound seat again if Max Verstappen abruptly quits, which he could do in 2026 if the new specifications and regulations aren't to his liking. If he's no longer having fun in Formula 1 and he doesn't enjoy the racing aspect, he's just going to walk. And Yuki will be right there, leading the team. That intrigue could be enough if Max Verstappen has the final say of who will be his teammate in 2025. I reckon he will have a little bit of input, but I also have a concerning thought that Christian Horner might snub these two drivers altogether. We might see them back at AlphaTauri once more, or Yuki out altogether, because Christian Horner has said that he isn't afraid to look outside of the Red Bull wheelhouse for whoever could partner up with Max Verstappen, taking away Daniel's last opportunity to score another win. Wow. Can you imagine if that happened? I bet both Daniel and Yuki would be crushed. And it does make sense considering that 2/3 of the grid are up for re-employment, including Yuki and Daniel. That is really tempting. 13 drivers out there that you can choose from. But let's just say that Max managed to get his choice outside of the Red Bull paddock. Who would he choose? Well, if he did have the choice, and say for example he was managing a Formula 1 team, he would of course drive himself because he likes to drive, and he would have as his partner Lando Norris, stating that he's young, has a long career ahead of him, and is very fast. And if it were a situation where he couldn't drive and he had to pick two drivers, he would basically just pick the McLaren lineup. That's a really big ringing endorsement for Oscar Piastri, isn't it? And I will never forget that time at the Silverstone Grand Prix when we finally saw the McLaren cars back up to the fore, where Oscar Piastri just dived into Max at turn 1. Wow, that was ballsy! But getting that little bit of kudos from Max Verstappen, the 3-time world champion, that's really gotta be something that you go, oh, thanks, guy. But Max and Lando being teammates, that's all well and good, but I really have my doubts as to whether realistically that could work, even though Liberty Media wants it. And that's something I go into detail a little bit more in this video that you can watch right now. Go and give it a look.